Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesdays. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum, and today we are working through, Greg, I am almost the gratuitous product placement today. We're working through another Grumman airplane, and right at the end of, or the middle to the end of World War II. And behind me is an F8F Bearcat. Now, this is a really, really neat airplane that we're going to go through today. You know, we talked about the Tiger Cat last week. The sad thing about the airplanes, and we're going to get to the Hellcat in a little bit, but the sad thing about the last couple of airplanes that we're talking about is they came in right at a big technology shift. And what ended up happening is they were, in their own right, marvels of the engineering thinking right up to the middle of World War II, Greg, if you can believe that. But they were also sadly caught in that seismic shift over to jets that we've talked about before, and a whole multitude of jet fighters that came in the Cold War in the early 50s, and we just kind of moved on from them. So today I am sure you're noticing my very festive headgear that Greg has picked out for me today. I appreciate this one, Greg. I can't see it, but it makes me nervous just putting it on. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off and toss it over to you. Oh, good catch there. I got my ears lowered as well. It feels so nice. I'm not doing the kind of Don Johnson look anymore. Today, Greg is my rumbustious assistant as opposed to rambunctious. Oh, you could be rambunctious too, but you keep throwing these exciting words at me, so this one is none different than it always is. So really what you're looking at behind me is we talked about, and I'll use the term again, the apex predators, these top-of-the-line piston engine fighters at the end of the war. They were a summation of everything that we had come to know during the war: combat experience, performance, engineering, technology. This is pretty much it. This is the top-of-the-line airplane. Now, the reason for this, and some of you can argue with me about that, and if you want to, let's get into the comment section. You can tell me why you think. I'm going to talk about some contemporary aircraft to this airplane in a minute, but you can tell me why you think your favorite airplane is maybe better than this one, and we can chat about it. But the reality is the Navy in the middle of the war was looking for an improvement over an airplane that we're going to contrast today with our model, Greg. We actually have a Hellcat, an F8F here. We're going to contrast in a minute. But this airplane is basically a step ahead. And the reason for that is the designers and the folks at the Navy were looking for some options. Now, we've talked about aircraft carriers, and we talked about the Tiger Cat having problems and only being able to really be even thought about deployed on the midway class carriers. Well, the Hellcat also posed a little bit of a challenge. Remember, on aircraft carriers, it's not just the deck, it's the storage areas, it's the hangar decks below, it's all the parts, it's support material, and you're rolling around out there, or moving around, flying around if you're in the airplane, but if you're floating around on a ship, Greg, unless ships can fly, which they might, and someday in the future, you never know. But the reality was you only had so many resources while you were at sea. That was a big challenge. And what the designers were trying to do with the Bearcat was they were trying to come up with something that had better performance than the Hellcat, but didn't take up as much space. So when they got out a clean sheet of paper, and I'm going to talk about something today that's going to blow your mind, Greg. It's going to absolutely blow your mind, and those at home as well. But what they were thinking about was how can they improve on the Hellcat, but with less space. Now, they failed in some ways. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges as they updated from this. You remember the Hellcat was a very capable fighter, a Navy fighter, designed in a very short period of time, and it was designed with one thing in mind. What was that, Greg? What was that one thing in mind? Its thing was air superiority over the Japanese in the Pacific. That is all the Navy really cared about. That was job one because they were getting shot to pieces which with a lot of the types that had already deployed against the Japanese Zero, and they were trying to come up with something in a very short period of time that would best the Japanese Zero, give them air superiority, and made up with that other weapon systems we've talked about, the Essex class carrier, so they could move around, these fast carrier strike forces. So come along, the designers now, they now have a capable aircraft in the Hellcat. They want something better, but they have a problem, Greg. They have a serious problem. And what is that? Well, of the 151 carriers, can you believe that the United States in World War II built 151 aircraft carriers? That is boggling the mind. But of the 151 aircraft carriers, 122 were either CVE, they were escort class carriers, or CVL, light carriers. Now, what's the difference between a CVE and a light carrier? And we've talked about like Independence class, some of the light carriers before in other segments, but really the CVE were escort carriers. They were typically built on merchant ship hulls, like Liberty ship hulls, or what we call not fast hulls, and they were designed for escort duty, for convoys. They would move aircraft around. They would go somewhere where you needed air cover, but you didn't want to have or risk your fleet class carriers, those Essex class carriers. Now, the CVLs were a little bit different in that they were built on typically warship hulls, and they were faster. They could keep up with these fast carrier strike groups. So that was the problem. Enter the Bearcat. Now, what the designers did initially was they wanted to shorten up the Bearcat, and they wanted to bring down the height of the airplane and the width of the wings. So they wanted to shorten up the wings. When they did that, they did a couple of things differently. If you'll notice on this particular aircraft, it is flush riveted. It's all flush riveting, and there's a lot of spot welds on this airplane. So what they called slicked it up. They reduced the aerodynamics. They shortened it up. This particular airplane is 20% lighter than the Hellcat, if you can believe that, which is amazing when you look at it. It looks like a bigger airplane. 20% lighter. It had a 30% better rate of climb, and it was 50 miles an hour faster in the prototype than the Hellcat. So they accomplished their job. Now, what they also incorporated a different type of aluminum in this, a heavier gauge aluminum, because the airplane was shorter and narrower. And the other thing, Greg, that is kind of cool about this is the wings on this airplane initially were designed to be detached, if you could believe that. And the engineers actually designed the airplane where the wing fold, you could lose this piece of the wing and the airplane could remain in flight. In other words, it could continue to fly. Now, there was, in practical terms, when they did that, they ran into a couple of problems. And Greg is going, well, what were those problems, Fred? You need to tell me the issues. Greg, I will answer your call. The issue was quite simply that when they wanted to take the wingtips off in an enclosed or controlled environment, they didn't have any trouble with that. But when they actually got them out into the field, they had a lot of problems with that. Now, the other thing they did was, Greg, they added explosive release to this. Well, that was great, and it actually worked until, guess what happened, Greg? Somebody got killed in one of those, and that ended that. So what they did after that was they redesigned this folding wing, and they actually made it a little bit stronger, and they did one other thing. We've talked about it before. They limited the G loading, the G force on the wing, the maximum G loading on the wing, so that you could theoretically would not lose this tip. So there are a lot of design variances in this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and lift off my Hellcat here for my compare and contrast. By the way, Greg, I like the teeth, but this guy's been out way too long. He's on a bender. He's bloodshot, so maybe get him a little water and some aspirin here. This is a very cranky-looking Hellcat. But what I talked about is they cut down the fuselage. They shortened it up. They made the vertical taller. because you went with that big four-bladed prop and a slightly more powerful R2800 engine. You could see the wing folds on this. They moved the wing fold out. They added what I talked about, those removable tips. Ultimately, they just did away with that altogether, and they re-engineered the tip of that wing, and they limited the amount of G-force, as I talked about. The machine guns on this airplane, you could either get 20 millimeter cannons, or you could get 650 caliber machine guns, 4 20 millimeter cannons, 2 in each wing. They went with that bigger propeller. And the interesting thing is, look at that canopy, Greg. Compare that beautiful high visibility canopy compared to this Hellcat. Now, Greg, I told you I was gonna blow your mind. Prepare to be blown. Greg, reinforce your skull. This is going to be a big one. This airplane had a design influenced by some familiar suspects, Greg. Familiar suspects. Now, there is debate, and again, you can go in the chat and you can argue with me about this, but if you look at this airplane, there is no question that this particular aircraft design had an impact on it. One of my favorite airplanes. What is it, Greg? The FW-190. The Grumman engineers actually looked at the FW-190, and this is hotly debated. So take it with a grain of sodium, a grain of salt, Greg. But it is hotly debated. But if you look at this airplane, there were two things. Grumman engineers actually went and inspected an FW-190, and there are some design features in this airplane. Now, when you're coming aboard carriers, you want a wide stance. We talked about the Wildcat, the F8F, about having that narrow gear, and you're on a pitching deck, and you're going to get tossed around. So wide stance, but look at this gear. Go out and look at the FW-190. Look at this gear stance and tell me if the gear stance doesn't look familiar. The other thing that they did was the cowling on this aircraft. The FW-190 in the radial version, and they played around with later, Kurt Tank played around with a lot of different power plants, V12 and some other things, in this radial, replacing the radial on the FW-190. The Germans had a really tough time because essentially what you have is you have that big flat surface up front, and you're flying around essentially with a big frying pan up right there, right, with the air resistance. So the Germans did everything they could to tuck in that cowling and reduce the friction, the air resistance up front. They were moderately successful, although the Germans would even admit that they had taken that cowling design as far as it could go to keep that airplane cool. And there's some reproduction FW-190s that have been done out there in fleets, because not very many Axis airplanes exist. And some of them have actually gone and put like oil coolers in the wings and things like that to give the aircraft additional cooling capabilities. So even today, with any of those airplanes that are operating, you have thermal issues with them. But you can clearly see the FW-190 influence on the cowling of this particular airplane, of this design. Now, what's the comparable airplane? Probably, Greg, I'm going to have you go out and look at a TA-152, a Focke-Wulf TA-152, which was a high-altitude interceptor that was done on the bones of the FW-190. It was done right at the end of the war. That aircraft, this one has a top speed of about 450 miles an hour. The TA-152 had a top speed of 469 miles an hour, performed very well at high altitude, and you can kind of see how they have a similar performance band. The other aircraft that are in the same performance slot, Greg, I would argue, is probably the Fury class, the Sea Furies. Very close. You can look at Sea Furies. Different type of power plant. You can go up and look at that power plant, and the British kept getting more and more complex with their radials, and you can kind of see that. So go out and look at the Sea Fury, and you can take a look at that. Of this particular airplane, it is one of those production orphans. About 1,265 of them made in various dashes. Now, this particular airplane, I want to do a salute, Greg. I want to do a salute. Are you ready? Now, today, what did you get me today, Greg? Dad's old-fashioned cream soda. I already told you when I saw this, I wasn't a big cream soda fan, so we'll have to see. The bottle on this one actually is pretty straightforward. The Dad's marketing guys didn't throw a lot of, botanically crafted. There is no sell-by date on this bottle, so Greg, call up Poison Control on your phone and have them at the ready. Now, what I want to do is salute. You notice the side of this airplane says Bob's Bear. I want to salute Bob Pond and the Pond family. If it weren't for Bob Pond and his family, this museum would not exist. And so I'm going to pop this open, and I am going to say thank you so much to the Pond family. We really appreciate it. Bob, wherever you are, we're thinking about you, and we miss you, and thank you so much for everything you did in getting this museum started. Well, it's not like burning my tongue out, Greg, like that ginger beer thing was last week. It has 200 calories. I did notice that. Greg, I'm going to hold on to this one today. So this is a winner for you today, Greg. But this is Bob's Bear. Bob was a Navy pilot, and he started the museum, and really the museum is formed around his collection of airplane, which this is one of them. Now, this aircraft went on. It saw combat in Indochina, both with the French and with the South Vietnamese forces. It actually, believe it or not, outlived the Tiger Cat in military service. As I pause to take another swig of this tasty beverage, it actually ended military service in 1960. Now, it lived on, Greg. And actually, I'm gonna give a few things away today, Greg. It actually lived on, or lives on, as one of my favorite airplanes, and that is Rare Bear. Racing airplane. We have Reno up here. This is actually a McCormick's straight bourbon whiskey bottle that, Greg, we are going to partake of that after we get done with Warbird Wednesday. That's how he gets me to put all those hats on, as he liquors me up before I get started. But it lives on. The Bearcat could arguably, whether it actually held the rate of climb record in 1946 for 10 years, if you could believe that. It held a lot of low altitude speed records. It is in air racing circles. People love this airplane, and it is probably Rare Bear has basically gone on to be a museum piece, or it's a collection airplane now, but in somebody's collection. But you could argue that the Bearcats were at the top of the line in air racers, and if they were running against some of the P-51s, if they were still running, they would give them a run for their money. So Rare Bear is really one of my most favorite airplanes. Now, Greg, one of the cool things when you come to the museum is that this particular airplane never saw Navy registry. This is one of two aircraft that were built that actually went into civilian registry, and this one lives with us. I believe, Greg, the other one was just recently flown, I think, by Steve Hinton over at Planes of Fame. we maintain this particular aircraft in ground run status. And so one of these days, if you come by, you might actually be able to see us run it up, as we actually do run it up periodically. Now, Greg, I am going to move to my very exciting gratuitous product placement. Last week, we were with the Tiger, for the Tiger Cat. With Bob's Bear, we are offering this beautiful, snuggly little bear. He even has the Palm Springs Air Museum thing on his scarf, a wonderful aviator's leather jacket that you could try on at home if you can fit in that leather jacket. Correct aviation goggles, and such soft, cuddly fur that you can hug this and dream of flying, as Greg does, dream of flying your own Bearcat, Greg, as he lofts through the clouds with his little rare bear here. How's that? Pretty beautiful tie-in. How do we do that? Was pretty good, huh? So this is the sum up on the Bearcat, one of the amazing fighters to come out of the end of World War II and live on and become a fan favorite. You got to come by and see this. Go out and pick yourselves up one of these little cuddly bears. Make sure on our channel that you smash that subscribe button, like us on Facebook. We can always use your donations. That's the only way that we can rebuild these airplanes. So go out to the donation page if you can. Drop us a few pennies. We can appreciate that. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Thank you so much, and have a great day.